All right, well, let's start with prayer. Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks for your love for us, for your constant nudging of us, for your constant encouraging of us. You lead us places where perhaps we would not want to go on our own, but with you, it makes it so much better. We give you thanks for opportunities to study your word, even the word that is confusing and unimaginably difficult to read. We give you thanks for allowing us time together to work it through together, to answer each other's questions and to support each other in this Bible study. We thank you for our family and friends, for all those who are able to be here and those watching online. We thank you for technology and all the things that allow us to reach each other with your wonderful word. In your Son's holy name, amen. Amen. That's for the people listening online. We thank them too. All right, so we are in session 5. So I apologize. I asked last week that you read chapters 12 through 16. Even though I knew we had 3 more weeks, I, in my head, thought we only had 2, and we had to do 16 and then 18 through 22. But we really have 3 weeks, so I'm really only going to do 12, 13, and 14 today, and that's really enough. But good for you if you read all the way up there. You'll just be really ready for next week. It gets, well, it eventually gets, tamer. But so we're only going to do 12, 13, and 14 today. And yeah, somebody wants to come. All right, where's my book? So, well, I did not bring my Revelation booklet. Who wants to loan me their Revelation booklet, so we'll all be hearing the same? I am so sorry, Barb. No, that's okay. Thanks. I just think since we have it, we should have the same one. I could read from what I have, but it won't be exactly the same. So we're going to start with chapter 12. Oh, yes. The woman and the dragon. Wow, that did sound loud. There she is. And a great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, and she cried out in her pangs of birth, in anguish for delivery. And another portent appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems upon his heads. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. The dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, that he might devour her child when she brought it forth. She brought forth a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. Rejoice then, O heaven, and you that dwell therein. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had borne the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, and times, and half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with the flood. But the earth came to help the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river which the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon was very angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and bear testimony to Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. All right. So that's chapter 12. Any questions?
What is going on here?
So if you remember, in the very first booklet, I had a little summary of the whole book of Revelation, and it was from the Life Application Bible Study. And so there's just this little snippet that explains what you just heard. So I'm going to just read a little bit. It's on page 2 of that very first session booklet. The final trumpet sounds, that's the end of 11. Sorry. And then, where is my microphone? Oh, I know. It fell off my ear. Hold on. Oh, that's going to be so much better. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so the trumpet sounded, and the rival forces of good and evil are called to a battle. On one side is Satan and his force, on the other side is Jesus with his forces. And during this battle, God reveals the absolute futility of Satan, who knows his time is short. We read that in chapter 12. His time is short, and who, though he desires power and wants to rule, can only parody God and Christ. Okay, so that's just a little, well, that's just a little snippet. So the battle lines have been drawn in chapter 12 immediately because the devil knows his time is short. I like the sound of that. So I have a cast of characters in your front page. You know, just try to get a handle on some of this. Who's happening? Who's showing up? We have the woman clothed with sun and the moon under her feet, who's pregnant and has wings of the angels, or the eagles rather. She gets the wings at the end to get away. We have a red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. Lots of diadems. And they want to devour the woman's child. The male child is to rule over the earth. The woman flees. Michael the angel shows up. The dragon has angels. That's interesting. And it doesn't say anything about what those angels look like. You know, if you're going to have details like 7 diadem on 7 heads and 10 horns on every head, you'd think the dragon angels would have some sort of descriptors. But maybe he ran out of ink. Then the dragon, called the deceiver, the devil, and Satan. Now, I tried to look up the difference between Satan and the devil, and they're just interchangeable, except Satan actually means the accuser or the opponent. Like when you read the book of Job, it almost sounds like Satan and God are buddies, you know, but Satan is the antagonist, obviously, the opponent. And the devil sometimes just refers to the embodiment of evil. You know, the devil's in you, or, you know, so there's a little different meaning between when we say the devil or Satan. Usually we just see Satan in Scripture, but he uses all 3 of those in the same sentence: deceiver, devil, and Satan. So all the same. And the serpent is the dragon. You got that, right? There's the dragon, all of a sudden he's the serpent. And then, this was so interesting, water from the mouth of the dragon tries to drown the woman, and the earth saves her. So the earth is a player in this, which leads to the explanation of some of this that I found out. Again, none of this happened in a vacuum. As much as we sort of envision John just sitting there and seeing all these things and writing this down, there's so many other stories that were alive at the same time, so many other mythologies, so many other of these same characters in creation stories and in battles of good and evil stories. And this picture of our dragon and the woman clothed with the sun could easily sound like, remind the audience of the Roman story of the sun god Apollo. And I have this in our book. Roma, the queen of heaven, was worshipped as a mother. The Emperor Augustus claimed that he had brought about the golden age of kingship with Apollo, the sun god. And the Emperor Nero, who will play a large part in the beast visions to come, went even further. Nero claimed that as an infant, he had been rescued from a serpent's attack, just like the infant Apollo had been. The Apollo myth said that the Python was seeking to kill Leto, who was pregnant with Apollo. So we have the woman, we have the child, we have the serpent. And Zeus, of course, is the god, sends the north wind to rescue Leto, carrying her off to an island, and then Poseidon, the sea god, then rescues the woman. So we have the woman who flees to the wilderness on the wings of eagles. We have the son that she carries, who we naturally equate with Jesus, who is taken right away to God's throne upon birth. And then we have the serpent doing the river of flood of water to try to kill the woman. And then in our Bible, it said the earth saves her. And in the Roman mythology, it was Poseidon, the god of the water, that saves her. So these stories are very much alike. And it would invoke, as people are seeing what John is saying and reading to them and writing, it might invoke some of the things they've heard through exposure to Roman mythology. So I find that interesting. Doesn't take away from our story, it adds to the mystery of it all. So the similarities are obvious. So we've just seen the enthronement of the Lamb in 11, but this scene is a flashback to the story of the birth and the rescue of the divine child. It provides an explanation for the hostility between the followers of the beast and the Lamb. And it's easy to see why people equated the woman pregnant with child with the Virgin Mary in some respects, although we try not to actually assign a lot of roles. We try to just keep it as the woman who perhaps then symbolizes the whole country of Israel, not just one woman, but she's actually the embodiment of Israel. And all the children she births are the people of Israel, the people of God, not just the Messiah. But it's hard not to read into these things. So she invokes the traditions from the Old Testament. She's clothed in the sun, and she has the moon under her feet. This sounds a lot like Psalm 104. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord, my God, you are very great. You are clothed with honor and majesty, wrapped in light as with a garment. You stretch out the heavens like a tent. So evoking familiar words of the Psalms as he describes this woman clothed in the sun and standing on the moon. And then again with the stars. The 12 stars in her crown could be the 12 signs of the zodiac, again, because of their exile, their captivity in Babylon, the people of God. By then they're called Israelites. Their name changed over the years. They were the children of Abraham. They were the Israelites with Moses, because Jacob had already had his name changed to Israel, and so his descendants were Israelites. And actually, by the time they were taken into captivity, they were Jews. Again, the southern kingdom was called the Kingdom of Judah, one of the 12 sons, and the name Jew came from that one son. So they were Jewish now, the Jewish people. But I'll still probably say people of Israel or Israelites. I don't mean to be confusing, but we have those different names that go with them. But you understand what I'm talking about. People of Israel, Israelites, Jewish people. So when they were in captivity, they were exposed to the Babylonians' zodiac astrology things and numerology things. So the 12 stars in her crown could be the stars of the zodiac, or because she could be, this mother of Israel, could just be the 12 tribes of Israel in her crown of stars. And then there's also Joseph's dream in Genesis 37, when he says, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Joseph, of course, was the son that the 11 brothers sold into slavery. They were jealous of him because of how much their father favored him. And so he had this dream about the sun and the moon and 11 stars. So, it kind of, all of these numbers just evoke memories of when they've heard other stories like that. The dreams of Joseph might be something too. But not to be left out, Isaiah 7:14 points to the child about to be born as a messianic sign. The woman's labor pains reflect those of the daughter of Zion in Micah 4 and Isaiah 26. And her cry is reminiscent of the voice calling out from the temple just before Zion gives birth to the Messiah in Isaiah 66. So the messianic sign, we'll talk a little bit about that. I wanted to also just say what I thought of after the fact. The similarity between her being sent off to the wilderness reminded me of Hagar back in Genesis 16. So Hagar was the slave woman of Sarai. She wasn't Sarah yet. She was Sarai, wife of Abram. He wasn't Abraham yet. Names are very important. And Sarah was supposed to conceive because Abram was supposed to have all these descendants as numerous as the stars and the sand under your feet. And so she sends, forces, makes, she gifts. You say it nicely. It's not a nice thing. Hagar has to go into Abraham. And she becomes pregnant. So she becomes pregnant, and then she doesn't know her place anymore, and she's mean to Sarai, and Sarai complains to Abram, and Abram says, it's your problem. So she sends Hagar out in the wilderness. She just sends her away, even though she's carrying this child of Abram's. I can't keep it straight. And God comes to her. She cries out in the wilderness, and God comes to her. And the fascinating thing is she then names God, the God who hears me. The God who hears me. She names God who comes to her at that moment of her great despair. And he says, nope, you got to go back. And then she says, but Sarah's mean to me. Tough it up, kid. I mean, literally, he just says, you got to go back. You got to tough it up. So she goes back. She gives birth to Ishmael, whose name means God hears me. And then, of course, he gets older. Sarai does have the baby, Isaac, and Hagar and Ishmael get banished again. And again, God comes and hears them crying in the wilderness. So it just reminded me a bit of that story of, no matter where you go in the wilderness, God finds you and God provides for you. He created a well to come up out of the desert for Hagar and Ishmael so they would not perish in the desert. So all these things kind of interlap, The main message is God is always the good guy. God always saves. Like when she gave birth and the dragon's ready to eat the child in chapter 12, the child is swooshed away to the throne of God. God comes and rescues the child. So we're always hearing that message of God being the rescuer and victorious. All right, so the cosmic battle now. The coming of the Messiah brings the age of salvation, or the messianic age. And so this simply means, again, when the people of Israel were taken into captivity, their temple was destroyed. Their temple in Jerusalem in 587 was destroyed by the Babylonians. And that was God. That was their religion. That was their identity. That's who they were, was taken from them. And then, of course, their freedom was taken as they went into slavery into Babylon. Well, the Messianic age then, because they had an idea in those days by the prophet Isaiah and Jeremiah that someone would rise up and would restore the house of Israel, restore Israel to its glory under King David, where they were a thriving nation and a power of their own. So the Messianic age was going to come when the temple could be rebuilt. So the Messianic age would mean the temple would be rebuilt, and then the Messiah could come. So the temple was rebuilt when a remnant of those came out of captivity and rebuilt the temple. They were still under captivity, and they actually had to go back to Babylon after they built the temple and the wall. This story is in Nehemiah and Ezra in the Old Testament. Those two books talk about the rebuilding of the temple in 516 AD. BC, 516 BC. And then that second temple lasted until AD 70 when the Romans destroyed it for the last time. There was no more temple. But so that was the Messianic age. And so John, the author of Revelation, is talking about, the age that is to come, the restoration of the kingdom. And, this is the Messiah that they envisioned, not the Christian Messiah. We had a different understanding after Christ came and taught us, but in the Jewish tradition, it was going to restore the power of the country of Israel. It didn't necessarily have anything to do with life everlasting or the promise of life everlasting. It had to do with that life right then, restoring their greatness. All right, so, but instead of any of that, in Revelation, instead of that happening at this moment, they go on the attack, and the dragon and his angels and the angel Michael, and they do battle. And it seems really fast before the dragon is defeated and cast from heaven. He's banished. But yeah, all right. So the dragon is going to be the last of the heavenly visions, the last of the heavenly creatures. Everything else now is only going to happen on earth. The beasts and everything else that's going to come in 13 and 14 and all that stuff is going to be on earth. So this is the last of the heavenly stuff. So Michael, the archangel, cast Satan out of heaven. This is not the end, though. The devil was still able to access and accuse humanity before God. I mean, it's they're just drawing out the ending here. He's banished from certain places, but he still has access to other places. The devil, Satan, he's not entirely without power. He's thrown down to earth. But there's rejoicing in heaven with that little poem we read at the end of chapter 12, but the very last verse of that poem, but woe to you, woe to you who still are not believing, the dire warning. But Satan is really angry now. I love that part. How angry are you? Really angry. I think I added the word very. It wasn't really in there, but I couldn't help myself. He knows his time is short. He pursues the woman. The dragon was angry, verse 17. He was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring. So now he's out of the heavenly realm and he's on earth, going to make trouble here on earth. Yeah, don't ever make a dragon angry. All right, so why does there have to be this battle? I mean, the whole history of the people of Israel, even as soon as they're out of the Garden of Eden, Cain and Abel battle. Cain kills Abel, and it never gets better. Jacob and Esau battle each other. Abraham and Ishmael. I mean, so there's personal battles, and then there's when they get to the Promised Land after the slavery in Egypt for 400 years, when Moses gets them there but doesn't go across into it. Joshua takes the Israelites into the Promised Land. The whole book of Joshua, the whole book of Judges, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Samuel, battling all the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Hivites, the Huzabites, the Whatsabites. I mean, everybody's biting everybody, and they're just constantly at war with each other. It's like the names of the groups from the 50s, the Shondells and the Riels and don't they all just sound alike? I just make up names after a while. Shondarels, so it's just like that, the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Huzites. So battling is just part of who they are. If they're going to survive, they're going to have to fight. And in those days, they took the Ark of the Covenant, which again was the presence of God in that beautiful box. They took the Ark of the Covenant into the battle, and they usually won. With King David, they won. And then they became this great country. So in their psyche is we have to fight. This is just who we are. And then, of course, they lose when they don't obey God, and the enemies come from afar and destroy their temple and take them into captivity. They never want that to happen again. They lost those battles. So it's almost like John is the author of Revelation is saying, okay, that was then, but now we're gonna have victory. Now we're gonna have victory over those enemies long since gone. So they're used to fighting. They're all about wanting to reestablish themselves, again, the Messianic age. But first we have to get through this battle, the heavenly battle, the dragon and Satan, the archangel Michael. Michael shows up first in the book of Daniel. We hear about Michael. And in Daniel, he doesn't necessarily fight Satan, but Daniel, in chapter 12 of Daniel, he just comes to the aid of the Israelites. He's the patron saint or the patron angel of those in captivity. So they call on Michael to avenge them, not necessarily fighting Satan then, but obviously now in Revelation, he's fighting the dragon and the dragon's angels, and he wins. So Daniel's final vision in chapters 10 through 12 of Daniel describes these series of battles until Israel will be victorious and the dead will rise again. Resurrection of the dead. So I just got done telling you that their Messiah, back the Messianic age, that Messiah was not one that promised a life everlasting. It promised a better life in this life. Whereas when Jesus came, we understood that it wasn't about this life, which would mean lots of suffering, especially for those early Christians, but that everything was stored up for heaven, for the everlasting life that was to come. Well, the resurrection of the dead was not something that was in Jewish writings before Daniel, or before Daniel's talking about angels and these final battles and the dead will be raised. A little bit of that in Isaiah as well, but this is the first time, and then it becomes part of the Jewish theology that the dead will be raised. Before this, everyone just went to Sheol, which is just a shadowy, dark place. Whether you were good, bad, in between, everyone who died went to Sheol. In the Jewish theology, and I'm no expert, and I know there's different kinds of Jewish, between the Orthodox and the Reformed and all that, but the things that I know I can speak of, their idea of legacy wasn't what was to come after death. It was to have the best life now, and then that the people coming after me, my children, grandchildren coming after me, would have an even better life. It's a legacy for this life now. And that was how that was the promise for Jews, was for the next generation. And so now Daniel is introducing this idea that there's going to be something even after you die. And that was something that quickly caught on in the days of Jesus, between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They each followed different rules. And the Sadducees believed in resurrection, the Pharisees didn't, and they were always trying to trip Jesus up, like when the woman had 5 husbands, and somebody says to Jesus, well, who will be her husband in heaven? And, my mom was married 5 times, so I'm really interested in the answer to this. And Mom and I had some good jokes about that before her final curtain. So Mom, who are you going to be looking for? And she says, I'm going to be anonymous. Some of you have heard my joke about my mom. She tried to convert men to Christianity one at a time. Doggone it, she only got to 5. Anyway, so there was talk of resurrection of the dead, even then in the days of Jesus. It wasn't new then. It had been introduced during the time of Daniel in his writings. But don't ask me whose husband she will be hers when she gets there. All right, so then we have in verses 13 through 17 in chapter 12, they're given the supernatural protection by God. The baby is immediately swooped up to this throne. The woman gets these wings of the eagle that will save her, and she survives. They use the period of 3.5 years. It was 1,260 days, and it was time and a half, and time. They use time in numbers, interestingly. But so year and a half, she's going to be okay. In Daniel chapter 12, again, he prophesies about 1,290 days and then 1,335 days, which is a little over 7 years, which is, that whole time of how long this battle is going to be, the 7-year battle. But John sees the serpent's attempt to wash the woman away with the flood from his mouth. And this would symbolize that armed invasion. God again protects the woman with what Ezekiel says is a tremendous earthquake. And this enrages Satan, who commits to attacking the rest of the offspring of the woman. If I can't have you, I'll get everybody else. And off Satan goes. So the name Satan again means adversary, or I think that's supposed to say accuser. My spell check did not get that. The word is derived from a verb meaning primarily to obstruct or oppose. And then the devil is used interchangeably, but can also mean the personification of anything evil. Personification of anything evil. Yeah, the devil made me do it, right? Flip Wilson made that line famous, or coined the phrase. All right, so then chapter 13. All right, hold on to your hats. The first beast. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 diadems upon its horns and a blasphemous name upon its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's. Its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth followed the beast with wonder. Men worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. Then they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over to every tribe and people and tongue and nation. And all who dwell on earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone slays with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. The second beast. Then I saw another beast which rose out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It works great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of men. And by the signs which it allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth, bidding them make an image of the beast for which was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast should even speak, and to cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or on the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast, or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let him who has understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. Its number is 666. All right. So now we have 2 beasts with, again, lots of horns and 10 horns, which are powerful, the 7 heads, the 10 diadem, just fancy, decorations, and blasphemous. This is a new thing, the blasphemous. So these are enemies of the people of God. Blasphemy is to say something horrible about God. Great disrespect shown to God or to something holy, or to say or do something that shows this kind of disrespect. It's a heresy, refers to a belief or opinion that does not agree with the official belief or opinion of a particular religion. That's on the bottom of your page. An interesting fact, Jesus was actually accused and then found guilty of blasphemy when he went in front of the Sanhedrin on the night he was betrayed. When he went to the Jewish authorities, they convicted him of blasphemy, and his blasphemy was saying that he could forgive sins, because that was only something God could do. So blasphemy, so these beasts are spewing lies about God, deceiving people about God and winning people to their side. He had this mortal wound which was healed, which is reminiscent of, the Christ coming back from the dead. Here, the beast is doing this now, so we can put our faith, our belief behind the beast, and be marked. We talked in the other chapters about how we mark the sign of the cross when we baptize people. So marking has been around for a long time, unfortunately. But the mark for the forehead or the hand, that they would be followers of the beast rather than followers of God. So there'd be no confusing them. And if you weren't a follower of the beast, then you would be annihilated. Pick your side. So with the dragon and the two beasts, we have this whole trinity of evil. We've got the three assaulting, switching over the authority and the power one from another. And then the saints of God are experiencing horrible persecution. The saints that have been called to endurance at the end of chapter 12, called once again to have endurance, are now under great persecution, horrible persecution. I'm sorry, it was in chapter 13. Here is the call for endurance of the faith of the saints. They are under attack again. In verse 7, the beast exercises a power over the world. He was given authority over every tribe and people, language, and tongue. So this is where we get the idea that the devil rules earth. That's been a teaching for a very long time, that the earth is the devil's. But this is talking about during this time, this battle, this place. But it's the Holy Trinity, which is the other Trinity, will be victorious. So the beasts use blasphemous words and actions to lead people to worship them. And they mark people up, followers and non-followers. And then we get to that number that is very well known, 666. Books have been written about this number. Movies have been made, conjecture after conjecture, guess after guess. What do these numbers mean? Is it a real person? Was it somebody then? Are we still to look for this person now? Numbers mean things in Revelation. The 4s, the 7s, the 10s, the 12s. We can't assume that it's just a number. In fact, it definitely means something because it tells us it means something. The number 6, it's interesting, being one number short of 7. If 7 is the complete number, 6 is one less than complete, so it's an incomplete number. It's not a good number. We are told in verse 18, this calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. It definitely means somebody. So, if the author of Revelation is telling people in the first century that they can figure this out, then we have to realize that 666 has to be a person that they would know from the first century. A person who is an enemy of the faith of the Christians, a person who has power and authority. Logical conclusions? Who's the enemy of the people then? Well, one of the Roman Caesars, one of the Roman authorities. And Nero, who is pictured below while Rome burns, the numbers associated with the letter of his name add up. The authority he had to destroy, torment, persecute Christians in the first century is verified. The massacres of Christians he instituted continued for 3.5 years. Peter and Paul were put to death under his rule. Only with Nero's death in AD 68 did the carnage and terror against Christians end. Not totally, but for a bit of time. So there's a whole formula that shows how his name in the Hebrew, every letter in the Hebrew language is associated with a number, and it adds up to 666. He was the beast that John is talking about. Now, it's interesting, you might know people who has names if you just count one for each letter, like if your name is, I don't know, Ronald, you'd be 6. I remember I'm reading The Late Great Planet Earth in seminary, which was one of the books, Hal Lindsey's, about Revelation, and trying to make it fit into our century. And we're getting to the number about 666, and who's president of the United States? Ronald Wilson Reagan. That adds up to 666. But I just use that as the silly example of how we translate things, to fit what we might want it to fit. I just thought that was really interesting. And I don't know if you remember this, just one of these things I can't help but remember. When he was able to retire and they moved back to, I think, Santa Barbara, the ranch in California, their address was 666 something. I swear to you, you have to Google this. But they changed it. They changed the address of the property. I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? It just gets ridiculous. So 666 was Nero. He was the enemy of the people in the first century. He was the one that that were putting people to death. And the author of Revelation is again trying to establish a sense of it will end. It will be all right. We're going to be victorious. Yes, there's going to be suffering, but the beast, the dragon, will be put down. So then we have a little bit of calm in chapter 14, right? It gets a little better. So we have the naming of the beast, and then we have the Lamb and the 144,000 in chapter 14. Then I looked, and lo, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the sound of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpers playing on their harps. And they sing a new song before the throne, and before the 4 living creatures, and before the elders. No one can learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are chaste. It is those who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Those have been redeemed for mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouth no lie was found, for they are spotless. Then I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth, to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. And he said with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the fountains of water." Another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon, the great, she who made all nations drink the wine of her impure passion." And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or his hand, he shall also drink the wine of God's wrath, poured unmixed into the cup of his anger, and he shall be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. And they have no rest, day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord henceforth. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them." Then I looked, and lo, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like the Son of Man, with a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat upon the cloud, Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Then another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has power over fire, and he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Put in your sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle on the earth and gathered the vintage of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. All right, so it sounded like it was going to be a little calm there in the beginning, the lamb, and on the cloud, and some angels are coming and talking, and, maybe, nope, we're not quite done. We're not quite done with all the battles. We do have a little bit of an interlude with the angels talking about the warnings and about the martyrs. Now we're thinking the 144,000 are those who have died, whose blood has flowed because they were children of the light, children of God, messengers of the good news. And once again, they're called upon for perseverance and endurance. And then the Son of Man comes on a cloud. Again, the idea of heaven, but this time with the sickle. We don't have the double-edged sword tongue this time, but we have a sickle. And the angel tells him what to do with the sickle, that the earth is ripe. There's a harvest to be had. But what is he harvesting? Is he harvesting, saints and sinners? Is he harvesting just the good? Reminiscent of Matthew chapter 25, when Jesus tells the story of those who do for the least of these, my brothers and sisters. When you saw me naked and hungry and thirsty, you gave me clothes and food and something to drink. And they said, when? When did we see you hungry and thirsty and naked and take care of you? And he said, whenever you do it to the least of these, you do it for me. And then he turns to the goats and he says, you did not feed me when I was hungry. You did not clothe me when I was naked. You did not give me water. And they said, well, when did we see you like that? And he said, when you did not do it for any of these, my brothers and sisters, you did not do it for me. And he separates the sheep that did and the goats that didn't. And the goats are like the chaff of the wheat that gets burned, and the sheep are like the good that gets saved and used. And so it's reminiscent of the reaping of the wheat, separating the good from the bad, and those, the chaff get burned. In this case, they get thrown into the wine press, which is the wrath of God. Wine press is the wrath of God. So the message is clear that the church of God is to be delivered, the enemies of God will be destroyed, and the last victory of God over his enemies will be fulfilled. That's the short version. But we have, these seven angels that pop in again, the reaping of the harvest. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, verse 8. She who made all nations drink the wine of her impure passion. This is the first time we're hearing Babylon in Revelation. I don't believe it'll be the last. And again, people have tried over the years, as they try to superimpose this on events now, in the book of Hal Lindsey in the late great planet Earth, I believe Babylon was Russia. We were at odds in the Cold War, midst of the Cold War in the 70s when that book was written. It gets retranslated or reimagined into other countries today to make it sort of fit today. But Babylon actually, by the time the author of Revelation was writing, Babylon didn't no longer exist. When the second temple was built, Cyrus of Persia had taken over Babylonia. So, okay, in your heads, Babylonia is Iraq, Cyrus the Persian is Iran, and he amassed Cyrus amassed more power than Nebuchadnezzar the Babylonian. So now, these places that have been warring recently, had been warring then, but Cyrus the Persian is the one who sends Nehemiah and Ezra back to rebuild the temple. So Babylon is already destroyed, even at the time of this writing. So Babylon is not Babylon. Babylon is, where does Nero rule from? Babylon is Rome. Rome is the enemy. Rome killed Paul. Rome killed Peter. Have put Christians under persecution, made them drink the wine. I mean, you know that expression, drink the Kool-Aid? You know, that horrible, horrible event in Africa, James Jones, drink the Kool-Aid. So this is almost reminiscent of that. Drink the nation, drink the wine of impure passion, you know. An interesting image that we can connect with that horrible event of recent history. So it's very tempting to make this want to fit now. I really hope as we read through this, we understand that we don't necessarily, we really should not do that. We should understand that this was happening then. He was writing to the people then. This was a book of hope for the people then and there. And hopefully it gives us hope for whatever is happening in our world right now. I mean, we're never without evil. We're never without battles. We're never without, you know, injustice and turmoil. You know, we're never without it, but that doesn't mean we lay this on today and say, yep. We just understand that whatever it is we're going through, we're going to be, you know, Son of Man's going to come on that cloud, and our time will come, and it will be victorious. And that's my lesson for today. What about questions or comments or things you've read? Yes.
You mentioned very at the end there about, you know, people trying to portray it for today as opposed to the first, second century. Part of the reason for that, I think, is because there is a sense within the world that history repeats itself in cycles.
History repeats itself in cycles, which is... Could very well be. I mean, their whole history was battling and warring and, you know, victory or you know, exile. And right, it's very easy to see this as history repeating. Yeah, I think you're right. Or we want it to make sense like that. We want it to try to make sense.
The vaccinated from the unvaccinated.
The vaccinated from the unvaccinated. Where's your mark? I actually have a smallpox vaccination mark. That tells you how old I am, right? What else? Well, what do you think? 5 weeks... Oh, Diane, yes. 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 Okay. Yes.
Their relatives or whatever.
Yes.
This isn't the flower garden I pictured of heaven.
Right. Right.
Because, you know, when you say that now you send somebody a sympathy card, when you lose somebody, you say, well, they're at peace. Are they really at peace?
So Diane is saying that the image of heaven as it's shows up here, it is not like the heaven we envision when we die, our loved ones die, and it's this beautiful garden and peaceful, and, you know, we recognize people, and there's no dragons, devils, angels, or fighting going on. And so I think you're safe with what you understand heaven to be. I think, you know, because they made the point of saying that when the dragon was kicked out of, you know, the heavenly battle, there's no more battling in heaven. You know, now everything's happening on the earth. So I think heaven has been saved. I think we can understand that heaven is that place of you know, and all of us probably have that different picture of what heaven is. Right, but like for my mom, wanting to be anonymous, some of us just want the party, want the reunion with everyone we've known and loved. And so this is the interesting thing. Did we talk about that in this class? So I teach this class on Tuesday nights, and I'm getting them confused. But the whole idea of resurrection of the body, which is what we say in our creed, versus the immortality of the soul, which does not have a body, which is the soul. And so when the Jews in the day of Daniel and the idea of resurrection of the dead started being taught and understood, the immortality of the soul also came into existence, the thought of the immortality of the soul. And that became one of the threads of Jewish theology, which then, of course, became some of our theology with our New Testament understandings, with Jesus. Resurrection of the dead means, the body is back to life. Jesus' body was back to life. We understand at that last day, whether it's a trumpet or a nuclear bomb or whatever it's going to be, the dead raise up and our body, we're back in our bodies. So what about this immortality of the soul thing? Before that trumpet sounds and all the dead are raised, isn't there that time where we are just a soul in heaven? That just made perfect sense to me. We don't get that really anywhere. It's sort of assumed or taught. It's taught by different lines of theology. Some people think they really just fall asleep. Paul writes that in his letters. We fall asleep, and at the end we wake up and we're resurrected. Others think that Jesus says, you will not drink of this wine until you drink it with me, the feast that has no end in heaven. Well, that doesn't sound like resurrection of the body to me in heaven. It just sounds like, a buffet that goes on forever, but not bodily. You know what I mean? So there's different things we take from the different messages of Scripture, and we're kind of just on our own, literally, but we understand the end is all God. However He does this for us, I can't imagine it'll be anything but wonderful. That's all I can really say. Suzanne.
I think one thing I do think about the passage where Jesus is on the cross and the thief comes in, and he says to him today, after he's proclaimed that he's the Son of God, he says, today you will be with me in paradise.
Right.
So whether it's a bodily
Right.
or soul, I don't know. Then I have to make another comment. It's just really weird, but my husband's Social Security number is 560-66-6662.
And he was a pastor. Yeah, we it's just fun to, I love that passage in Luke 22 when Jesus says to the one thief that defends him from the other thief who's making fun of him, and he says, today you will be with me in paradise. I had this wonderful woman named Mabel that I used to visit and give communion to, and she had macular degeneration. She had all these ailments. She was way overweight. She'd had breast cancer. They wanted her to keep having mammograms, and she just didn't want to go. She'd tell me, she told her doctor, I got to die of something. She's 95, she just doesn't, she's not doing that thing anymore, no more mammograms. So we had these wonderful conversations and about what was to come. She was raised in a German-speaking Lutheran church in Illinois. I think it was even Peoria, and Peoria, Illinois. And her pastor during confirmation was very, very rigid about you go to sleep. And that verse in Luke, specifically, he said, that does not mean today. Today you'll be with me in paradise. It doesn't mean today. It means the day you will be with me in paradise. So I tried to tell her, it really says today. You can fiddle around with translations. And she said, nope, her pastor, she's 95, she's not changing what she thinks now. I said, all right, I'll see you when I see you, and we'll know then. So bless her heart, she did die of something, and we had her funeral, and it was just wonderful. She had one daughter. She was so much like my grandmother. She had one daughter, like my mom. Her daughter was Dolores. My mom was Doris. Dolores had 4 daughters. My mom had 3 daughters. Anyway, it was just the fun, how our lives kind of interacted. But at any rate, she died, and we had this service, and her picture was on the table with her ashes. And I was telling the family this conversation we had all the time about today, not today, today, not today. And I said, Mabel, now you know, don't you? And the picture fell over. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, there they all were, and my mouth just drops. It's like, Mabel, I was right. I can't wait. I mean, it wouldn't have worked for anybody else, but for her picture to fall just when I'm telling her family about that line from Luke. Oh, it was just too fun. Anyway, we will know in the end, and then we'll know. Oh, yes. The soul doesn't die. The body dies. Has to go somewhere. There you go. Well, that's immortality of the soul. Yeah. I mean, there are some that just don't want to see it that way, but I totally get what you're saying.
And then there is, I mean, God's
God's time
time is different than our time.
is different than our time.
So, you know, we say the earth was created. Well, my husband always said, you know, it took years and years and years, not one day at a time. The days were long.
Right. A day to God is like 1,000 years for us, or whatever that psalm is. Right. Different timing. Yeah. Yes, Barbara.
I just remember the time that I swear the Holy Spirit with my guy.
Uh-huh.
When my 3-year-old asked me, and she knew what was important at that point in life, and she said, Mama, will there be pizzas and swimming pools in heaven?
Pizzas and swimming pools in heaven, asked a 3-year-old to her mother. Now what?
Well, talk about the Spirit. But the Holy Spirit put the words in, and I said, Missy, whatever you need when you get to heaven, God's going to have it.
Whatever you need when you get to heaven, God's going to have it. That's what she answered. And that's what my theology professor pretty much said to us about what we're going to find in heaven. Very good, Mom. Yeah.
I didn't do it, I swear. Who did that?
Isn't that fun how God does that?
Grateful that I got the words.
Excellent. Yeah, I love that when that works. Oh, sometimes it doesn't. Wonderful. Well, we made it through 3 more chapters, and I ask you now to read just through, did I say 17? What's on the back of your book? 15 through 18. Okay, so the battle commences, more disasters, and then 19, 20, 21, 22, we're going to have that final vision. So, yeah, it's not over yet. Thank you so much.